Welcome to Fight Week on 5, brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network. I'm Jonathan. On my left, we have the fight genius, Alpha Artiaga. How you doing, my friend?
Great.
Now, we got, just cut right to it. We had a couple of good fights this last weekend. We got a couple of good fights coming up in the future. But before we take a look in the future, we want to take a little look back. Let's start with UFC Vegas 18, because that was a pretty good card. Let's start with the co-main event, probably the most exciting part of the entire night. Cory Sandhagen's flying knee, knocking out Frankie Edgar in under 30 seconds.
Standing flying knee. Yeah. I don't know. I saw it. I was watching it, and I saw it happen. And I couldn't believe I just saw it happen. But, I've never seen anything like it. If I have seen it, it's been with a punch. But a standing flying knee and Frankie Edgar, and they kind of jinxed him before the fight, too. They said that he had actually fought 7 hours in the octagon for his career. He was the longest, nobody has been in the octagon more than Frankie Edgar.
He spent the longest in the octagon so far.
Yeah, and sure enough, wow. It was insane. It was absolutely insane.
It's one of those things where you almost can't believe what you just saw, and you got to process it a little bit in your head before you actually take a look at it, because watching it live, it was like, okay, he's closing the distance. Oh, he just jumped, and Frankie just went completely limp and dropped to the floor. And that knee was so perfectly placed. It wasn't just under the chin. It was off a little bit to the side, so it also kind of rung his head over, too. So it was a really good knockout. He was out for a little while. You could feel the energy in the building once he got knocked out. It was kind of a highlight immediately, but doing it to a guy like Frankie Edgar, a good guy of the sport, it was kind of sad to see him be down for a little bit. But I do think he'll be back. Now, for Cory Sandhagen, for putting in such a big shot, does he deserve a title shot right now? Because there's a couple of guys in the distance. Right now, I think the only guy that might be over him after that Jan and Sterling fight might be TJ Dillashaw coming back. He's a known guy. But Cory Sandhagen, he just put up Moraes with a spinning back kick. And I think Moraes was number 2 or number 1 at the time. And now he put in Frankie Edgar, who is a former champion at 155, working his way all the way down. Do you feel like he deserves that title shot? And even if he does, do you think he'll get it?
He deserves it only if we get one result in the Peter Yan Aljamain Sterling fight, and that's if Aljamain Sterling wins that fight. So I believe that, he deserves a chance to redeem himself against Aljamain Sterling, but does he deserve it right off the bat if Peter Yan defends? No. I think he has to get that win back against Aljamain Sterling, because quite frankly, he didn't look that good in that fight. He looked like the inferior fighter. He looked like a step below. So he's going to have to prove that he belongs in a title fight going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's done a lot lately, but if he's not able to pass that ranking of Aljamain Sterling, it's hard to see him being the number 1 contender in that division, especially the way Aljo put him out. Aljo put him to sleep, and it wasn't even a close. I think it was first round finish. So, yeah, he would definitely have to get that win with Aljo, but I do think Aljo has a good chance of beating Peter Yan, especially since he's such a well-rounded mixed martial artist. So do you think, moving on to Frankie Edgar a little bit, do you think Frankie's done? Do you feel like this is the end of the line from him? He had that really close split decision with Pedro Munoz, which was, I think, controversial. I think Munoz won that fight. Now he's had this loss to Cory Sandhagen. Do you think he can hang around the top of this very, very competitive 135 division, or do you think that he's done from here?
I gotta feel that it's probably over. Frankie Edgar has so much mileage on him. You gotta understand, this is the guy that retired BJ Penn. BJ Penn was last really competitive maybe 15 years ago. We're talking about 15 years ago. When was that fight? Can we look that up?
2015. I could probably pull it up right now.
Yeah, look, because they fought twice, I believe, right? Let's play one of my favorite games, which is looking up things on the air. Frankie Edgar, when was the first time he defeated BJ Penn? Because I don't know what that had to have been a long time ago.
Yeah,
right?
The last time was 2014, but I'm not sure what the first time was.
Okay, the first time he defeated BJ Penn was April 10th of 2010.
So 4 years in between those fights.
Okay, that was 10 years ago, okay? Then he beat BJ Penn again in a controversial decision. I remember that one. Because the first time he beat BJ Penn, he just boxed his face off. The second time, I thought it was a little bit controversial. They fought in August of 2010. We're talking about fights 10 years ago. Okay, he had his 2 fights against Gray Maynard in 2011. Yeah, Frankie Edgar, the mileage has piled on. He's lost 3 of his last 4. Yeah, it's time to start fighting on some. I don't know. I would call it some. I think he's a headliner for a prelim now, and he's close to retirement. I would say this was bad, especially at his advanced stage already. Yeah, this was bad, and this probably ends his career as far as
Yeah,
championships.
right, 100% as far as championships. I do think Frankie is still a competitive fighter. He was able to throw down a really, really good fight with Pedro Munoz, and I feel like he could be one of those guys that's kind of maybe the gatekeeper for the 135-pound division, where maybe he's like hovering around number 5, fighting these up and comers, and at 40 years old, it's hard to think that he could put 2 or 3 fights together, just because the damage you'll sustain at that level is pretty high always. He's gonna be in these wars, and if he's not in wars, he's going to get knocked out violently. So I feel like for Frankie, he's going to have to be maybe kind of a higher level Donald Cerrone, where he's kind of the gatekeeper at the top of the 135 division, because it's clear that he wants to keep fighting. And you never want to really count Frankie out because he's such a well-rounded mixed martial artist. But I feel like, yeah, like you said, he's done at the championship level.
Yeah, he could become an attraction like Clay Guida is. Like, like I smiled when I saw him. He was on the card, and then I was shocked when I learned he was only 39 years old. Like I thought Clay Guida was like 58 or something like that. But he could be that. He could be an attraction. Like you put him on a card, you're gonna get a good fight. You're gonna get a professional in there for
Yeah,
3 rounds.
Frankie's always going to give you it all, especially with his 5-round experience. 3 rounds isn't as bad anymore. He's looking to he's making these weight cuts better and better. You know what I mean? This is the division that he probably should have been fighting at. You know what I mean? He kind of was bulking up to get to 155, and even at 155, he was doing such a phenomenal job. But this is the weight class where you want to put yourself, if you want to have a size advantage on some of these guys, this is the weight class that he should have been competing at. But moving it a little bit into the main event, because that was one fight where we kind of see the pages turning on an old guy's career. Alexander Drago Volkov put it on Alistair Overeem. He just laid it out there. Overeem just didn't have the offense to compete with him, and Volkov came out looking real good. He looked like, I think, 20 pounds heavier than his last fight. So he's really learned how to put on this weight and bite down on his strikes and really, really just become a legit threat. So what do you think? Do you think he's a legit threat for the heavyweight belt?
I would say so. If you saw him jab and you saw him move in that ring, I mean in the octagon, and Alistair Overeem really did look like he couldn't see those punches coming. He looked like he couldn't block any of them either.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to give credit where it's due. Alistair Overeem is one of the better opponents in the heavyweight division. If you look at his resume, it's a who's who. He's beaten everybody, and he's been in there with everybody. And I think this is the worst he's looked in a while. So yeah, absolutely, he's a contender, because if he can land those punches with that ease against Alistair Overeem and essentially make him quit, like it got to a point where Alistair Overeem was eating right hands and eating straight jabs, where he was thinking, you know what, I can't block these punches. Like they're just coming in at will. He's hitting me with anything he wants to hit me with. So yeah, I'm weakening here by the second, and I'm just gonna fall down with the next good right hand, and that's exactly what happened. So if if Volkov is that, he's a danger to anybody in the heavyweight division.
Yeah, I think he can come in and be such a unique threat because he's probably the tallest guy of the top 5. Let's see, you have Stipe and Ngannou is number 1. I think you have number 2 is going to be Curtis Blades, and then you have Derek Lewis, John Jones. You know what I mean? What's going to happen with John Jones? Does he come in and get a title shot immediately versus an Ngannou or a Stipe? Whoever wins that fight, I think it's Ngannou for going forward. But I think he could be a legit threat, but he's going to have to get his wrestling up, because we saw what Curtis Blades did to him. He absolutely ragdolled Alexander Volkov. Now, he's a little bit heavier now, and he's learning to use his length a little bit more. So it'll be interesting to see if he can keep that fight staying a little more. But Curtis Blades set the UFC record for takedowns in a fight against Alexander Volkov. So he'll have to do a little bit more for me to be on that top of the heavyweight division. Mm-hmm. Now, for Overeem, what do you think? Do you think this is the end of Alistair Overeem, or do you think he still can be one of these top guys in the heavyweight division? Because he was coming in 4-1, I think, in his last 5 fights, and that one was that fluke loss to Jorginho Rosenstruck. Not a fluke loss, but everybody knows kind of he was dominating that fight all the way through. But he was coming in almost on a 5-fight win streak, and now he runs into a guy and he doesn't look like himself. He didn't use the clinch. He didn't use the wrestling. Anything that you thought he would have tried to use to have the advantage in this fight, he didn't really use. He just shelled up and he kind of went into the corner and he would just try to literally run away. And we would see Overeem like make these sprints looking like Usain Bolt in the ring. But what do you think? Do you think this is the end for Overeem, or do you think he's still a high-level heavyweight fighter?
Well, I believe in looking at like the last five of a fighter, especially in boxing. I like to look at the whole body of work, but in the UFC, I like to look at their last five, and his last five merits another look. I think anybody can have a bad night. He had a bad night in the octagon. He just couldn't block those punches. So I think he has to pick the right opponent, get back at work, and look better, especially in the clinch, especially boxing. Because, he looked bad. He looked like a guy that's never defended himself before from jabs or right hands. So he's going to have to look better. But he deserves a long look to stay in at the top of that division. He deserves a shot if he could get himself back in. But, of course, like I always believe, you have to get these wins back. So he's going to have to get this one back. And I don't know, like that looked bad. That looked like a bad matchup for him. But he's going to have to get it back. Because I think that's what's standing in the way for him.
Yeah, he's definitely going to have to get this one. Manny's chiming in. He's saying he doesn't have the cardio for the big fights. But he's showing that his cardio is looking really well, especially, with Jairzinho Rosenstrike. He was dominating, taking him down for 5 straight rounds. Same thing with Augusto Sakai. He took him down, and once he got him to the ground in the 4th round, he just rained down with ground and pound. So I'm not sure what the problem was this fight, if it was his gas tank, because it was only the 2nd round where he was getting knocked. But he started to use this just turtle shell defense where he would just cover up. And if Volkov actually went to the body, he could have finished that round in the first fight because he was going primarily to the head. But I do think Overeem is a unique threat, but I feel like this might be the end for him as far as getting a heavyweight division or a heavyweight shot, just because there's so many people at the top of the heavyweight division. It's such a crowded and clotted up top of the division, and it moves slowly. If you look at the last couple fights, it was a year in between Stipe DC1, Stipe DC2, and Stipe DC3. And Ngannou was basically knocking guys out in 30 seconds or less. All during that time, those fights were happening and probably deserved a shot at that time. So with the division being so slow right now, it might be the end for Overeem because he's, 41 now? And for him to climb back to the top, it's going to have to be like 3 straight wins. And I think that's a little bit hard for him.
Yeah, and let's face it. The heavyweight division is really waiting for one guy and one guy only, and that's Jon Jones. And you know how they're going to market him. They're going to market him by saying, look, this guy's unbeatable. He's the boogeyman. Like, nobody can beat this guy. And you know what? They're not lying.
Nope.
All right? They're not lying. So they're gonna try to get him beat, and that's how they're gonna market fights. So they're gonna put him in with a Francis Ngannou. And think about it. Do you think Francis Ngannou could beat Jon Jones?
Yeah, puncher stance. And
yeah, if he touches him right, the fight will end. Okay, it's as simple as that. So I think that's what we're waiting for in the heavyweight division. Everything else is just noise, I think. There's some good opponents out there. We're going to have a good one, I believe, in a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Derek Lewis.
Yep, Lewis Blades, and then the following week we have Rosenstrike and
Derek Lewis, right?
Derek Lewis versus Curtis Blades.
Yeah, Curtis Blades.
And then the week after is going to be Rosenstrike versus, I want to say Sakai? Not sure right now.
Yeah, all of those are nice fighters. All of them are great fighters. All of them are fun to watch. It's just noise.
Yeah.
We're just waiting. We're just buying time till Jon Jones gets into the division, and then that's going to be the heavyweight division. Really,
is going to be Jon Jones. Francis Ngannou. Stipe might be done. If he loses that fight, I think Stipe might retire because he.
Yeah, I would say Dana White. I'm not in his head or anything, but if I'm Dana White, I go to sleep every night thinking, okay, winner of Stipe Francis gets Jon Jones. Period.
That's a money fight because we know the DC and Jon Jones thing and how that would kind of tie into the storyline with Stipe beating DC, being one of the 2 guys that beat DC. That would be very, very interesting. I think that's a great selling point. And it's interesting to think about if Jon Jones loses that fight, does he set up that fight with Israel Adesanya? Does that be something that becomes a little more interesting and becomes a little more intriguing? It's going to be Rosenstrike versus Cyril Gane. I think Cyril Gane knocked out JDS recently too. So that's going to be a really good fight coming up as well. Moving back a little bit to Friday night, we had Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. We had before we get to the Bare Knuckle, we had a couple of good undercards fight. Clay Guida was coming in, fought Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson is a guy who beat Tony Ferguson, beat Dustin Poirier. He has such good guys on his resume, but he just doesn't work against crappy fighters. And not to call Clay Guida a crappy fighter because he fought a really, really good fight that night. But he can't.
And he's a Hall of Famer. I learned on Saturday night he's a Hall of Famer. I didn't know that.
I didn't know either. Before he even retired, he's been in the sport so long. How impressive was Clay Guida on Saturday?
Oh, he was. He was Clay Guida. Okay, I remember watching this guy. Like, go look at his record. Okay, and go look at fights. Like, he's been fighting for 20 years. All right, like, this is the guy that he's. I don't know, like I would like to see the numbers next to the UFCs he's been in, because if he's fought in a UFC, like let's say UFC 92 or something like that, I would believe it, okay? Because he's been around forever. But that's always been Clay Guida. Ultimate cardio, tough guy, will take punishment, will throw punches, will come forward, will be exciting. He was everything cracked up to be, and he deserves more looks on main event cards. Like, he deserves to be on the main card going forward. Get him on a big show. Maybe we have one of these fights where, it's an older fighter in the main event. Maybe give him a co-main event, because he deserves it. He deserves it going forward. He's been a great ambassador to the sport, and I don't remember a bad Clay Guida fight ever. I really don't.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that really doesn't give up. You know what I mean? He'll go out on his shield. Made his debut in the UFC 64. So that's a long.
That tells you, and we're at 258, right?
Yeah, and even before that, he was fighting Gilbert Melendez in Strikeforce in 2006. So that just tells how long Clay Guida is coming in. And he said he wants some of these up and comer guys. So it'll be interesting to see if Clay Guida can make a run or a crack just to try to make the bottom of the rankings, just to show that he can be that guy, and maybe just get more paid. Obviously, if the more wins you get more paid. But Clay Guida looked really good, even in his post-fight interview. He was still going. He was acting like he was on the cardio machine, and he looked great.
Yeah, that's been Clay Guida since the beginning. He never stops moving. And when he's doing his interview, he's always doing this, and when he fights, it's constant pressure, constantly coming forward. He's fun to watch, and I can't wait to see him again. I really can't wait to see him again. The only thing, like I said, it was shocking to me that he's only 39 years old.
Yeah, for being in the UFC for so long, in the fight game for so long, he's really grown up in the UFC. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's one of these guys.
Made his debut. What a stat! Made his debut UFC 64.
And it's UFC 258 coming up. So he's going to be probably, if he's in the sport for another year, he's going to be here for 200 UFCs, not including fight nights, which is an absolutely insane tenure with the UFC to keep earning that contract. And he actually just got a new four-fight contract. That was the first fight of his 4-fight contract, so it'll be interesting to see what he does in those next 4 fights. Another really good fight of the night, actually, Beneil Dariush versus Diego Ferreira. Man, that was such a scrap. Those guys going into it in their rematch, because Dariush won that first fight, and I think Ferreira was undefeated at the time. So now these are one of the guys that came out. Both of these guys were just below the top 10 in the such a heavy lightweight division, and man, Beneil looked great. He looks like one of these guys that can strike. I mean, he had that spinning back elbow finish his last fight. He can take you down on the ground. He's one of maybe the dark horses, kind of like a Charles Oliveira of this division. And if he comes in and if he fights somebody like a Paul Felder or somebody of that caliber, I feel like he can crack himself into the top 7, top 8 moving forward. How did you feel about that fight early in the fights?
I don't remember much about that fight because I was grilling, but I did remember seeing the finish. And it's the more the merrier. The division's getting stacked, and we need to make some fights. Is what I'm thinking, because all these guys, we keep talking about all of them, they're not fighting each other yet. Yeah, right.
And these guys are all going to get cross matched up soon enough.
Yeah, so that's coming. That's coming in at least toward the end of this year and definitely next year. So I'm excited for it for sure.
Yeah, we had some really good fights as well. Devontae Smith just busting up Justin Jane's eye, and Ode Osborne coming in, catching that kick on the shoulder, and then giving it to him with a straight left. And I learned in his post-fight interview he's a substitute teacher for 4th and 5th graders. So this dude is a 5th grade teacher as his day job, and he goes and knocks people out on Saturday night. So that's a pretty good job as a teacher.
Yeah, I don't know how. He wanted that guy wanted to continue, but I don't know how you felt about it. Devontae Smith.
No way. Yeah, there was no
way, right? Like he couldn't see from that eye.
No, and if that pops, his eye might be done.
Yeah.
If that
So
pops, that would have been it for his eye. And James is a tough
yeah,
guy, but
yeah. At the where I was watching the fight at my sister's house, and her boyfriend was disagreed with it because he said, "No, look, the guy obviously can see because he's moving his head wherever the guy's moving, so he can see out of the eye." And I'm like, "You don't know, maybe it's instincts, and he's feeling his way in the octagon." You know what I mean? You never want to take a chance with a guy whose eye is probably closed. So you never want to have a guy handicapped in the ring
no,
or in the octagon ever, because
no.
that's how you get hurt.
Yeah. Yeah, the doctor's job is always to protect the fighter. So I feel like they
Mm-hmm.
did an absolutely good job. It was kind of like that Donald Cerrone eye after he fought Tony Ferguson. He just got beat up. But Devontae Smith looked great in that fight. He came out. He's one of these prospects that are rising up and that can make really a crack in the future with his explosiveness. One of these
Mm-hmm.
guys that are just a true athlete in the division. Any other fights in that card did you that caught your eye?
No, not really. It was kind of a top heavy card for me. I enjoyed the final fights. I was shocked by that Frankie Edgar fight because I told the guy sitting next to me, I told him, Frank Edgar's going to bore the hell out of us because he's gonna box this guy to death. And sure enough, bang, and the fight ended. So yeah, it was a good card. It was a very good card. UFC never disappoints, really.
Yeah, and we're in the midst of I think 6 straight weekends of UFC fights. We have a title fight coming up this weekend. We're going to talk about. We got a title fight coming up in 4 weeks. Adesanya versus who was it? Jan Blachowicz going in to become a double champ. We got Aljamain Sterling versus Peter Yan, and then Amanda Nunes versus Megan Anderson. That's going to coming up, man. We got a great month coming up. One last thing, last week we had Bare Knuckle FC. Paige Van Zandt on that $1 million contract going in and getting beat up versus Hart. Do you think she's made for this sport, or is she just an attraction just to draw names to it?
Well, she's obviously an attraction if they're paying her $1 million, right? But I know people talked about this bare knuckle boxing, and I don't like it. And I'll tell you why. Okay, we've had bare knuckle boxing before in history. Okay, we're talking about 150 years ago. That's how the sport started. Boxing. That's how boxing started. And they used to go 65 rounds because nobody landed more than 25 punches or 30 punches. Because if you land 200 punches bare-fisted, first of all, you're going to break both hands. Second of all, you're probably going to murder the guy in the ring with you, and you're going to go to jail. All right? So, it was a bad idea then. That's why they adopted the Marquez de Queensberry rules of wearing boxing gloves and having a referee and breaking up tie-ups and having ropes. So I think it's a bad idea, and for Paige Van Zandt, it's an even worse idea. I don't have much interest in bare knuckle boxing except when we have the cross promotions with a boxer and an MMA guy. Sometimes that could get interesting because I don't know if you saw the Paulie Malignaggi fight when he fought bare knuckle.
Oh, yep. Yeah, it was him
Okay,
versus Jason Knight, right?
I believe so, right?
I think it might
Or
have been
was it
that.
No, or was somebody else?
Or Artem Lobov. One of the two.
Yeah, Lobov. It was against Lobov.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was against Lobov. That's interesting.
that was an
Okay.
amazing fight.
Okay, that's a little bit more interesting because now you have a boxer that knows how to pace himself, knows how to throw softer punches. Okay, but as a mainstream sport, bare knuckle boxing, not for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's one of those sports that that's a little more violent, but I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. I love it. You know what I mean? You have a lot more blood. You wear it a lot more. For people that likes violence, I think it's a great thing. And
Yeah,
honestly,
but I really do believe that the skill level goes away a little bit when it's bare knuckle.
for sure, because it's a little bit less of a punching radius. You know what I mean? It's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit less technique, but it's a little bit more of a slight cross between MMA and or maybe let's say MMA and boxing, where you have
Mm-hmm.
just straight hands. You're not using these gloves, and I've heard rumors that it's a little bit safer because it's not so much sub impact to the brain. It's just more damaging to the face. So I'm curious to see what really the thoughts on that.
Well, that's
Zach,
the truth. That's absolutely the truth. And I know people are going to say, okay, this guy's crazy. How can it be safer to get hit in the face by bare knuckles? Well, it's for the same reason that MMA gloves are safer for you than boxing gloves are, because you get hit in the face with MMA gloves, and guess what? If they hit you right, you're going out and the fight's ending. In boxing, you'll be able to take maybe 500, 600 of those blows before getting hit with the right one that takes you out. So you can accumulate a lot more punishment in boxing than you do in MMA. So yeah, I tend to agree. That is absolutely the truth.
And, it's like it's another brand of combat sports right
Mm-hmm.
now, and I think the combat sports is in such a good spot right now. I mean, even Shaq sees it. I want to talk about this a little bit. Shaq actually invested or is starting to invest in Bare Knuckle FC. What do you think about that? Do you feel like that's going to bring the sport over to a little more mainstream? Because he does think Shaq said that he thinks this is the future of fighting. What do you think about what Shaq said about Bare Knuckle FC?
You know what? It's not going to be the future of fighting when they have a big time fight that they pay a lot of money to both fighters, and both fighters break their hands in the first 30 seconds of the fight, which is part of the problem, or a really bad cut, and they have to stop it.
Yeah,
That's part of the reason why I don't think it's a viable sport going forward, because too many things can go wrong. Bare knuckles,
yeah.
okay,
There's a lot
but
more at play.
I think it's an attraction. I think it's like if you could get a Paulo Malignaggi, like I said, an Artem Lobov, that
Chris Lieben. We had Chris Lieben last weekend.
Chris Lieben, okay? Like you could get cross promotions. It's always a great idea. You know what I mean? So, is it are you gonna draw John Jones there in 5 years? No way. At least I don't think so. Okay. Are you gonna draw Stipe in a couple of years when his contract runs out? I don't think so. So yeah, it's I'm not gonna call it a freak show, but it's fun, I'm not against it. I just don't think it's a viable sport.
Yeah, there's a lot more at play. You know what I mean? With MMA, it took so long to kind of incorporate with the sanctioning of the sport
And the rule changes
and the
and the
rules.
weight classes.
Exactly. So a lot of things are at play, and especially when a sport first comes out, it's a little more. There's a lot more at play. You know what I mean? So it's one of those sports that you don't know what's going to happen, but hey, it's fun to watch. Let's talk just a little bit of Chris Lieben. He gets the knockout in the first round of that fight. Ending his career, retiring from combat sports. What's your favorite Chris Lieben memory?
Wow. Let me see, because I've seen so many Chris Lieben fights. I know that there was one in particular. And I want to see if I could bring it up, because I don't want to talk out of school. But let me see if I can find the fight here.
Well, I'm gonna let you know mine in the meantime while you look that up.
All
I
right,
like
go ahead.
when he was in the Ultimate Fighter. I think that was when he was the most entertaining. You know what I mean? When he was just that guy in the house, he was kind of like the odd man out, and he got kicked out. He broke the glass on the door, and he was just a character. And it was such a good, installment for that first season of the Ultimate Fighter. So I think that's probably one of the best memories of Chris Lieben. He was such a good fighter. I think he got knocked out by Anderson Silva, but such a fun fighter every time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Such a fun fighter every time he went to the ring. And for him to call it a career, I think it shows how much he's grown, especially from that first season of the Ultimate Fighter, just being kind of a kid. He's grown up a lot from then, and it's nice to see him retire, especially with a walk-off knockout.
Well, of course, his win against Vanderlei Silva was something to see. But I remember the fight that I was like, wow, like that was something. Was when he beat Sakura.
Oh yes.
Okay, that was his problem. That was his. I would think that was his mountain of his career.
Yeah.
Because he did get into the octagon with Bisping after that, and with Rosh Holt. But I think that when he beat Sakura, that was when everybody said, "Whoa, like this guy's for real. Like this guy's not, And of course, I remember him at WEC as well. So Mike Swick, look, I just remember that fight as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, Chris Lieben, great career. Is he a Hall of Famer? Because
I would think so. I would definitely think so. First coming out of the first season, he didn't win the Ultimate Fighter, but first season of the Ultimate Fighter, he's grown up in the UFC. He's been there for a long time. I think he's one of these guys that should be definitely with the work of his entire work of art in all the people that he's fought. He's fought so many legends. Like you said, Sakuraba. It's kind of like beating John Cena at WrestleMania. You know what I mean? Nobody really does it. So beating a legend like Sakuraba was, like you said, probably the top of the mountain for his career. And I do feel like he's one of these guys that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. And yeah, a lot of fun. He was just a lot of fun.
A lot of fun, great guy, great character. Dyeing his hair red for every fight. You know what I mean? He was a great one. Now, moving up to another a potential future greatest of all time fighter. If he continues on this track, Kamaru Usman coming in on UFC 258, taking on his ex-teammate, Gilbert Burns. What do you think about that fight? Who do you think was winning those matchups in Sanford MMA? Because these guys are coming in. They've trained together for a long time. They've worked together all the way up until Usman became a champion. And then obviously he went to work over in Colorado with with the great coaches over in Colorado, Elevation, with Justin Gaethje, those guys up there. Who do you think, before he left to go over there, who do you think he was winning those matchups in the gym with Usman and Burns? Because somebody knows who was actually the real better fighter when these guys are practicing together. Who do you think it was?
Well, Gilbert is like, he's a heavy-handed wrestler. So I would say, if they're using a referee and they're breaking him up, I would say Usman. But if they're just grappling in a gym by themselves, I would say Gilbert Burns was probably winning them. Now I want to ask you a question. I was watching Combat Brazil. Why in Brazil do they call Gilbert Burns every time Durinho?
Oh, I think that they have that as his nickname in the UFC because they have him as Gilbert Durinho Burns. But I'm not sure. Yeah, in his older fights, in Gilbert's old fights, they actually used to call him Durinho.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm not sure why they changed it to Gilbert. If that's just kind of his preferred name, and use Durinho, maybe that's as a calling name.
Yeah, because in Combat Brazil, every once in a while, they use like some English phrases, or they talk to somebody in English, and everything was Durinho this, Durinho that, and all the graphics said Durinho.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's Gilbert Burns. That's
who's Durinho? Is that his cousin? Like,
yeah, why they keep calling him Durinho? And they never said Gilbert Burns ever. And there was like an hour talking about the fight. They never said. Oh, and by the way, have you ever watched UFC on Combat Brazil?
Not off. I probably wouldn't. I'd have to see if those were the fights that I watched, to be honest with you.
Okay, that's a lot of fun because they have for every single card, they have a counter, Brazil versus the world.
Oh, yeah.
And have a running counter. Yeah, and they watch fights completely biased for the Brazilian fighter every single time. It's pretty fun to watch. It's fun to watch a card with them.
Yeah, I love when they put up those cards in Brazil because, man, those Brazilian crowds, they're just so crazy. Especially with when they had Jose Aldo taking on, who was it? Somebody taking on somebody who was like just in the crowd saying Jose's gonna kill you, and then just do it. They get so animated, kind of like that Ireland crowd with Conor. It's just it's such a draw to have down there. Now, both of these guys are really good on the ground. Now, if you look at the stats, getting into Gilbert Burns, he gets about 2 takedowns every 15 minutes, which will translate maybe to about 3.5 every 25. You're looking at a full 25-minute fight. And for Kamaru Usman, he's looking at about 5 takedowns every 25 minutes. These guys are different kind of grapplers. Kamaru Usman will take you to the ground. He'll kind of stay in your guard. He won't really pass too much. He might go to side control or go to path guard. But what he'll try to do is really posture up and just keep the pressure on you, use his head control. And with Gilbert Burns, he's a guy that's just phenomenal off his back. He's good on top. He can take you down. He really likes to use the single leg a little bit more. Which one of these two guys do you think is going to have the advantage on the ground? Because that's really the interesting part of this fight.
Yeah, I wonder how it gets to the ground is what I'm wondering. Because Usman when he fought Colby Covington, I didn't understand what he was doing. He ended up winning, okay? And he ended up beating Colby at his own game, really. But I don't understand what he was doing when Colby was giving him every single opportunity to take him down. And he wouldn't take it. He wanted to box with him. He ended up winning, so that's fine. I want to see how it gets to the ground. Does he want to just box Gilbert Burns? And if Gilbert Burns is going to be the aggressor to get it to the ground. And I would say if Gilbert Burns is the aggressor, he's the one who's looking to take him down, and Kamaru Usman is trying to defend takedowns, that's going to tell me a lot. And that's a reason why I wouldn't bet a dime on this fight, because if that's the dynamic early in this fight, I could see Gilbert Burns winning. And I could see him winning big, actually.
Yeah, I feel like if Gilbert Burns can really get, if Kamaru Usman, best takedown defense in the UFC, Heinisch, 100%. 100%. They've just never been taken down by anybody. Damian Maia, RDA, Colby Covington, Tyron Woodley. None of these guys were able to take Kamaru Usman down. So if Burns is able to do it, and Usman gets put in a position that he's never been in it before against a guy who's great on top, he can get you with the triangles, he can get you from the Kimuras. If he's on the bottom, he'll get you with the arm bars. He's able to just really good usage of his hips, and he's a little bit of a smaller 170er because he moved up from 155. But he just has such good usage of his hips. It's going to be interesting to see who will have really the advantage on the ground. So moving on to Burns for a little bit, we talked about his hands. You know what I mean? He has really, really heavy hands. He throws really looping shots. He throws really, really heavy body kicks. But it might be interesting to see if he's going to use as many of those kicks, especially against a wrestler and the guy that can take you down. But what do you think Gilbert Burns has to do to win this fight?
I think those inside leg kicks are going to be key. Absolutely. And I'll say this: if he could build his offense off of those inside leg kicks and they start landing, that's another thing. Like you can tell, I'm talking myself into liking Gilbert Burns in this fight. But if he could get that to kickstart his offense, and then try to shoot on Usman, and Usman is readily defending those takedowns, then yeah, I think it's probably bad news for Kamaru Usman, because I think Kamaru Usman's path has to be a little bit closer to what he did against Colby Covington. Because one thing I don't like about Gilbert Burns is that he fights extremely small. He hunches over and he drops his head to throw punches. He could be timed, and a good boxer can time him and touch him up for 5 rounds if need be. If Kamaru Usman wants to do that and he trained for it, I think he can pull that off.
And he's been working with a really good guy with Justin Gaethje as far as a striker up in elevation over in Colorado. So it's going to be interesting to see if Usman's striking game has developed. But as far as Burns, I think he's the guy that needs to be on the front foot. We've seen a lot of times people be so hesitant to fight Kamaru Usman and try to really be backing up a lot of the time because they're afraid of his wrestling. You have a guy that doesn't mind being on his back so much. You know what I mean? He'll take you out from his back if he wants to. So I think for Gilbert Burns, he has to come in. He has to put the pressure on, because Usman does not strike as well when the pressure is on him. He has to be the guy stepping up and being forward. So if Burns is able to keep him on the front foot and keep Usman stepping back, his striking is not going to be nearly as effective. And like you said, Burns has heavy, heavy hands, and it only takes a couple from Burns to put you out. So I feel like Burns, as long as he keeps the pressure and tries to maintain that forward pressure moving forward, he can be the guy that can dethrone Kamaru Usman. But let's get to Usman. Dude's 17-1, hasn't been defeated in 9 straight fights? 8 straight fights? Let me see what that is. We're looking at 16 straight fights. I'm sorry about that. 16 straight fights. Hasn't lost since, I think, his second fight in MMA. What does he have to do to win this fight?
Well, it seems like he can do whatever is required, right? Like, I don't understand, he says one thing, and Colby Covington says another thing. I would really like to put him under truth serum and ask Kamaru Usman, did you mean to do this with Colby Covington? Because if you did, that's stupid. And I guess congratulations that you won, right?
Yeah.
But you allowed Colby Covington an opportunity to beat you.
Win rounds. It was 2-2 going into the 5th.
Yeah, because it was kind of obvious that you could have gotten to the better parts of your game and beaten Colby Covington. And okay, it would have been boring. Maybe you wanted people to say that you were exciting and that you're a main event player now, and you're a pay-per-view guy. Maybe you wanted to do that. If you tell me that, I'll buy it. If not, I gotta say that's the little, that's a hole in his game, right? So, what does he have to do to win this fight? I think he has to be clinical. And clinical can mean boring. But what's not boring? Holding the strap at the end of 5 rounds. Again.
You know what I mean? That winning bonus, too.
Exactly. So, yes, he has to be clinical. He has to guard against those leg kicks. He has to be mindful of the takedowns. Because I think that's Gilbert Burns, I can tell you right now his game plan, what it's going to be. It's going to be inside leg kicks. It's going to be those looping right hands. And he's going to try to take you down, okay? And not necessarily in that order. So, those are the 3 things he's going to have to do. Yep. So he's just going to have to guard against all those things, try to get closer, use some dirty boxing, maybe step away from him and throw straight punches down the pipe. And if you do that, you're good enough in takedown defense where you can embarrass a guy. Sometimes you score that way. If a guy tries to take you down 6 times, and you successfully defend it 6 times, judges look at it and they think of the other guy as a lesser guy, as a guy who's not at your level. And you can just win the fight that way. It's boring, I know, but, winning's winning, right?
Yeah, and he's been doing a lot of winning recently. I mean, he's beaten top guys in the division. Tyron Woodley, when Tyron Woodley was at the top of the world, that's when he got beat by Kamaru Usman. And I think you're right. He has to be a little bit boring. I feel like for him, it's really going to be making sure that his hands are up. Sometimes he gets a little too comfortable with the wrestling and he puts his hands down and he tries to feint fake the takedowns and fake the level changes and drops his hands a little bit. So he's going to have to keep his hands up. Hopefully he learned a little bit from that Covington fight, from getting hit with a couple of good shots, like you said, to keep his hands up. But I think for him, really keeping Gilbert on his back foot and pressing him up against the cage. Because, I mean, that's what Kamaru Usman's game is for. He's pressuring you against the cage, and then he's going to level change. And like you said, instead of some level changes, I would like to see him just start raining down some straights, raining down some body shots. Because a lot of times when he has his opponent pushed up against the cage, they're just worried about the takedown. So their hands are always dropping. So he can be a guy that can go and finish guys up against the fence because they're just so afraid of the takedown. But sometimes he just decides to go and just goes and crotch sniffs. He goes for that double leg, and he'll just hold it there and hold it there and hold it there. And, you know, it works. It's effective because he'll get the takedown. He's one of those guys that's good of grabbing your ankles under your legs and kind of tripping you down and just working you down methodically, you know, working you from one leg to a knee to two knees and down to your back. And he'll do it just kind of in a process. So I feel like you said, he has to be methodical in this fight. And he's just going to have to make sure that he's wary of Gilbert Burns' game off his back, because Gilbert Burns can submit you off his back. So he's going to have to make sure that his, you know, BJJ is shirred up, and that he's going to have to be always wary of what Kamaru's or Gilbert's hips are doing and what they're trying to do. If they're trying to catch an armbar, if they're trying to check a triangle, or trying to go upside to maybe get a guillotine. So it's a great fight moving forward into the beginning of the night. Who do you think gets the win? It's, you know, one of probably the hardest matchup for Kamaru Usman at this moment. Who do you think gets the win on Saturday night?
I think it's a coin flip, and I wouldn't be surprised the least bit if Gilbert Burns won this fight. But I want to say Kamaru Usman's instincts are going to be correct, and I think he's gonna fight a really, really smart fight. I think he's going to throw those punches right up the middle. I think that's going to get Gilbert Burns moving backwards a little bit. And if Gilbert Burns is not the aggressor, he's going to lose rounds. He's going to lose a lot of them. And then Kamaru Usman, there's nobody better at running out the clock in the UFC than Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman could easily win the first 3 rounds and then kill off the next 2 rounds, win the fight. So I say Kamaru Usman wins by decision, clean decision. Let's say 4 rounds to 1. Gilbert Burns has some early moments. Kamaru Usman figures him out, puts him away from there.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on that same side. You know, if I had to put some money on it, I would definitely go on Kamaru Usman, just because you know what you're going to get out of him, and you kind of know that he's a master of his craft. He's a master at taking you down. Like you said, running out the clock. He'll win a couple rounds, and then from there he'll just kind of sit on you and wear on you and do what he did against Masvidal. Keep you against the clinch, stomp on your feet. That's all he needs to do, just to keep scoring. Now, moving on to the co-main event, a little bit of a weaker co-main event. It's not the biggest fight on the card, in my opinion. I feel like maybe the Gastelum Heinisch fight could have been in this spot. But we have an unranked Alexa Grasso, taking on the number 10 ranked Maycee Barber. Now, Maycee Barber's coming in. Her last 5 wins have been by knockout. And for Grasso, she's coming in with 8 of her last 9 fights going to decision. So it's one of these things where you can have maybe an exciting fight, or these guys just kind of become a little bit boring and move to try to maybe get a decision. What do you think about this fight, and who do you think wins it?
Maycee Barber, when I first saw her on the scene, I was like, let's face it, and let's face what her original draw is. She's cute, okay? She's really cute. And then when she gets in there, she's an absolute killer. All right? I want to ask you a question. What did you make of her fight against Roxanne Modafferi, their last fight?
I feel like she was just outclassed by a veteran. You know what I mean? Somebody that was able to know which part of her game to employ, because Modafferi's been in this game for such a long time. I mean, she shouted out Clay Guida because they've both been in the UFC for almost the same amount of time.
Yeah.
Look at it. She's one of the ladies that have been here probably since, the beginning of female MMA. But, she did what she had to. She took her down, she controlled her, and she just made Barber just not have anything to do offensively. She just didn't have, wasn't able to take her game offensive. But
that gave me a little bit of pause, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. But before that, 5 straight wins, I think.
Yeah.
So she's coming in record.
Before that, what was it? 1, 2, 3, 8 straight wins. She was 8-0 coming into the fight.
So that was her first loss.
Mm-hmm. And she had won. She had won Dana White's Contender Series, and then she had made her UFC debut. And all 3 of her fights, like right there, you're looking at it. Okay, TKO, elbows and punches, knees and punches. She was finishing girls, and she was finishing them in a ruthless manner. So you were thinking, okay, Poor Roxanne Metafer. They're gonna give her this maniac. Okay.
And how many times have you seen Modafferi just get busted up by these up and comers? Because she's the
Yes.
gatekeeper of that division. So everybody will
Yeah.
come in. Well, her face just gets bloodied up by the end of the fight, and she just has to wear it all. But luckily, she was actually able to get the upper hand in this fight.
Yeah, I kind of felt good for her, to be honest with you. When she won the fight, I was like, okay, good for you. You trained, you got ready for this fight, and you beat a darling in the division. Okay, that gave me a little bit of pause. Like maybe Maycee Barber isn't what everybody's saying. I fear that this is a little bit of matchmaking being done here by Dana White, because I don't think Dana White wants to just run her out of the division, run her out of the UFC. So maybe Alexa Grasso is a setup here.
Yeah.
So I'll take. You asked me who would win. I say Maycee Barber gets back to her winning ways, and her winning ways are just brutal. It's just So let's say second round TKO. Punches.
Yeah, that's kind of been the what her wheelhouse has been, is getting those second round TKOs. Now, if you look at the strikes, she averages 6 compared to 5 by Grasso, averaging about 60% of her strikes landed, only against 42% for Grasso. So you'll see she's probably going to be a lot more effective on the feet, and her striking differential is better too. She has almost a 3-strike striking differential per minute versus just a 1.5 for Alexa Grasso. So I have to agree with you. I think this kind of is one of those setups where you want to have Maycee Barber come up and try to look maybe good for a future contender if she's able to work her way back up the rankings. But I don't see Grasso really winning this fight. It should have to come in and do something special and kind of show that she's grown as a fighter. But I think this is still a fight that's kind of a little bit behind what she can do as far as getting this win. Now, moving on to another interesting in this fight in this card, we have Kelvin Gastelum. And this is a guy who's lost 3 straight after putting on an absolute war with Israel Adesanya. Very weird fight with Darren Till, really weird fight with the Joker, and he's just not looked the same, especially after that fight. Taking on Ian Heinisch, who is kind of an up and comer. He came up on the Dana White's Contender Series with a good knockout, has had a lot of good fights. What do you think about this fight going into Saturday night?
Well, Kelvin Gastelum is not a guy that you would look at and think, okay, he's on the way out. He's lost 3 in a row. It's the way he's lost those fights. I think. I hate to say that this is a get-right fight, but I think that they're dropping him a little bit in class to try to set him up, not to win, but to set him up to get a breather. Because, come on, just look at his last 7 fights, who he's fought. Okay, yeah. Who makes it out of there with as many wins as he had?
And he's only 29.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of career here to go. He just caught a bad stretch, okay? And to be honest with you, I thought he fought a great fight against Izzy Adesanya. That Darren Till fight, like you said, it was weird, right? Like,
yeah, very much so.
How can you score that, really?
It was so little volume at all. It was almost like the Adesanya versus Romero.
It was one of those fights. Yeah, it was one of those fights where you watched it and you were like, I don't know who won. You know who won? And you start asking everybody. And if somebody says, you know what, Darren Till won, I'd be like, okay, I'll take your word for it, man. Because, I watched the same thing you did, but I don't really know who won. It was one of those fights where you wanted both guys to lose.
Yeah, okay. Really, they just didn't put on any performance at all. These guys just didn't show any volume.
Which is interesting. I was watching, and I wanted to ask you this question. I forgot about it the last time we were going to do the show. The last time we did the show, I wanted to ask you this question. I was wondering if you thought that the UFC should employ this, and that's in Thailand when they have their fights, their Muay Thai fights. They have you can have a win, you can have a loss, and you can have a draw, right? But you can also have no joy, which is that the referee, because the referee is one of the judges, right? And then you have 2 judges along with the referee, and they could 3 just look at each other and said, no joy, meaning the fight is a no contest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which means, okay, you guys, figure it out. Nobody won and nobody lost. Do you think that's something that they should start doing in the UFC?
I feel like it would be hard to keep people's record straight. You know what I mean? Because now you're looking at if this fight was really a win or really a loss. And I'm looking at the numbers. 40 strikes landed by Gastelum and 36 by Darren Till. Over 5 rounds. You're looking at 7 strikes a round. 1 strike per minute.
Like Derek Lewis, Francis Ngannou. It feels almost bad to give either one of them a win there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So just call it a no joy. No joy. And that's it.
I think if it's a no joy, I think both guys should get a loss.
Okay.
I think both guys should get a loss because, I mean, like you said, nobody enjoyed that fight. It was one of those fights where, thank God, it was during Masvidal Diaz. So at least we had that one coming up later in the card. But that was one of those fights that just absolutely horrible. But like you said, he has a lot of career left. He's not a guy that's really old yet in the UFC, but he's had a lot of fights. He came up, he won the Ultimate Fighter against Uriah Hall, and Hall had so much hype going into that fight. But I feel like what we've seen with Kelvin Gastelum is that he's fallen in love with his hands. You know what I mean? I feel like he came in as really a heavy wrestler, a state college wrestler, and now he's just falling in love with the hands and getting up to the and stopped really using his wrestling as much. And just to get to Cap for Life's comments, yeah, I feel like Burns' style on the ground is really interesting, but it's going to be interesting to see which one of these guys you face Miami's very own Jorge Masvidal.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Has anybody ever had a murderer's row like this on their record? This is Kevin Gastelum, okay? All right? And we're not going to go back to Rick's story, okay? We're going to start with Tyron Woodley, okay? Woodley, Nate Marquardt, Neil Manji, Johnny Hendricks, Tim Kennedy, by the way. Tim Kennedy, who does more TV than fighting nowadays. But he was a big-time fighter at the time. Vitor Belfort, Chris Weidman, Michael Bisping, Ronald Souza, Izzy Adesanya, Darren Till, Jack Irvinson. Like, who's fought a murderer's row like that? Nobody.
That's probably
So I think that this fight, it's not a setup, but this is a fight like, hey, take a breather and come back. So I would look for him to win big in this fight.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be one of these things where I'm not sure if he's going to finish Ian Heinisch because Heinisch is such a tough guy, but I can see Kelvin Gastelum really, if he's able to go back to his roots, use his wrestling and then mix up his striking with his wrestling and use it in a combination. I feel like, that can be one of those things where he can get back and move forward and move up into that division again and because he really is a threat in that division if he's able to keep his momentum going. Now, moving against Cap for Life, what do you think about Wonderboy? Do you think Wonderboy is a threat in the division?
No, I think the last time that we talked about him, we said he has one more run at it, and if he gets there, he gets there, and if he doesn't, he doesn't. It's a 50-50 shot, really, for him.
Tough,
I think he has one more shot at it. One more.
Because, like, a guy like Tyron Woodley, or not Tyron Woodley, sorry, Colby Covington, or whoever loses this fight between Burns and Usman, he's going to have to go through at least one of those two guys. And with such a good takedown game, even though Wonderboy Thompson, I think, has the second best or the best takedown defense behind Kamaru Usman, it's going to be hard for him to be fighting, especially if he's able to be taken in his back. Now, moving on to the rest of the card, we not the most exciting card, but there are a couple of fights that I did want to look at. Going down, we have Maki Pitolo versus Julian Marquez. That's going to be an interesting matchup. These two guys are both pretty young prospects coming in. They both have heavy hands. So I feel like this is one of the fights where you can see a finish going in. We do have a hype train. Rodolfo Vieira taking on Anthony Hernandez. Rodolfo, his nickname is the the black belt hunter because he's so good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So Anthony Hernandez, decent, submissions, but I feel like this is a fight where we can see Vieira just go ahead and really destroy him on the ground and get a submission. Bilal Muhammad, a guy who's 17-3 right now, pretty good record, working his way up into the welterweight division, taking on Douglas Lima's little brother, Diego Lima. Any thoughts on that fight?
No, nothing really. Not on these fights. Like, these are fights I'm just going to enjoy. But, yeah, no thoughts.
Yeah, Bilal is going to go in. I think he's going to wipe the floor. Lima is a decently well-rounded fighter. But Bilal is one of those guys that just comes in and he imposes his will. I think he can use his wrestling. I think he's a little bit better on the striking. And I feel like that'll be a very fun matchup to see. Andre Ewell taking on Chris Gutierrez. I think that's going to be a fun 140-pound catchweight bout. Early prelims are actually pretty good. We have Phil Rowe, the Fresh Prince. The guy looks like the Fresh Prince when he was sick on that one movie and he had his really swollen face before he drank his Benadryl. Taking on Gabe Green. And Gabe Green actually made his UFC debut on short notice. And he fought a guy who knocked out, I think, 5 of his last 6 opponents. And he went the distance. So that's going to be an interesting fight. Phil Rowe was one of these guys that has come out with a bunch of knockouts. Gabriel Green has a hard, tough head that just doesn't seem to go down. That Chris Lieben head where he just seems to continue to, just stay up on his feet somehow. And then Ricky Simone and Brian Boom Kelleher, that's going to be an interesting fight as well. So, a couple of sleepers on this card as far as fights, but as far as a pay-per-view, a little bit weaker for that card. Any other fights that you found interesting on that card?
No, I think we could finish up right here for the week. I think that the card's kind of top heavy, but I like those three fights. Those three fights are really interesting at the top of the card.
Yeah, definitely a very top heavy card. As far as that. Now, moving into a little bit of news, Bellator is making some pretty big moves. They've just partnered up with Showtime, so now they're going to be moving to Friday nights, and they're going to kind of have this fight weekend theme going, where they're going to have their MMA on Friday nights, and they're going to have their boxing on Saturday nights. You
Hmm.
obviously being a bigger boxing guy, what do you think about this announcement and their partnership with Showtime?
Well, it's great. It's and it's kind of genius, really. It's live sports. That's the reason that ESPN paid so much for 52 boxing dates a year. Nobody really wants to say how much they paid, but the rumor is it was $110 million a year for
Wow.
52 boxing dates. Okay, to Top Rank. That's a lot of money. All right, you're talking about $2 million per fight that they're going to put on. If it's $2 million per fight to put on, you're talking about maybe $1 million in purses and then $1 million in profit for Top Rank. So yeah, it's a great deal. It's just smart, and it goes right back to why did HBO get rid of boxing when they did, and when they had a shot at getting the UFC, they rejected the UFC. I think it's just a mistake. If you
Yeah.
could get live combat sports, it's a great TV sport. Now I got something else to do on Friday nights for sure.
Yeah, they have some other cards like LFA or Titan FC on Friday nights, but none of those really come to the level of Bellator. And honestly, Bellator is starting to really clear their head of the pack and become the clear-cut number two. You have some guys like PFL, you have ONE FC over in Japan. Like I mentioned, Cage Warriors, Conor McGregor started there, LFA. But Bellator is just kind of putting themselves head and shoulders, becoming that really direct number two to UFC. Now, they've made another major announcement having this light heavyweight World Grand Prix. In the first round, we're going to see Yoel Romero take on Anthony Rumble Johnson. What are your thoughts on that fight?
Wow, you got to think that Yoel Romero is going to wipe the floor with Anthony Rumble Johnson
You
now.
think so?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting, but it's a throwback, right? It's a throwback to the Pride days. A tournament, absolutely. What did they used to call it?
The Grand Prix?
Yeah, it was called the Grand Prix. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'm all for it. A tournament, absolutely.
Yeah,
That's going to be fun.
it's great. I mean, if they have it's such a fun atmosphere. You know what I mean? They're gonna have three events back to
Mhm.
back to back starting in April. Phil Davis is gonna take on Vadim Nemkov in the first round for the light heavyweight. Nemkov just came out, knocked out Ryan Bader, and that was a very exciting fight. You got Ryan Bader taking on Lyoto Machida. I think that's a rematch as well, and that's gonna
Mhm.
be an interesting fight. And then we have ex UFC fighter, another one, Cory Anderson taking on. I'm not gonna take the shot at this guy's name because it's like 60 something letters long, but he's taking on a newcomer to Bellator. So they have a very exciting future up in Bellator. Those tournaments are coming up. They're having the featherweight tournament finishing up as well. And like I said, there's LFA coming up this weekend. There's some other smaller events coming up this weekend. Any boxing news in the world moving forward?
No, and I think we could close right there. Next week, Miguel Berchelt returns to the ring. He is going to fight, and not that it matters, but he's fighting Oscar Valdez, 12 rounds. He's going to defend his WBC junior lightweight title. Miguel Berchelt, with a win, which he will get, okay, propels himself into the conversation with Teofimo Lopez, Tank Davis, the rest of them. So that should be a lot of fun.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, we have some good fights coming up for boxing, UFC, everything's coming up. Keep it locked right here. Thanks for watching Fight Week on 5, brought to you by the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We got Alf. Thanks to Manny in the back. I'm Jonathan. I hope you guys have a great day.